David is the founder and CEO of Deaton Group Consulting. He has over 2 decades of experience transforming organizations through strategic planning, financial analysis, market research, and effective execution. Throughout his tenure, David's work has led him across the United States and throughout the world, where he found good tea in England, to partner with startups, growing companies, and nonprofits, all of whom look to him for assistance in establishing missions and organizational designs, financial resiliency, and creating a pathway to growth and long-term success. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, David. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's truly an honor to be with you all and to talk about this topic about pivoting in uncertainty. And I've got a couple of slides. I'll share them with you. But really, I want to make sure that we turn over to some of your questions as well. And maybe we just go ahead and start with that. I think that'd be pretty powerful to, you're here in the conference, you got an option to pick a breakout room. Now you're sitting in this room together after hearing, I thought was a really wonderful presentation from a keynote speaker. And I'd just be curious, sort of what drew you into this discussion that you were hoping to learn some information about? And there is small enough group, we should definitely just go off mute and ask those questions. If you want to raise your hand or you want to put it in chat, that's fine too. I'll catch it. But I think I'd just be curious to know, what drew you into this breakout room that you were hoping to learn more about? Anne and Oliver, you're both off mute, so I don't know if one of you wants to go first, or if that was an accident, you can put yourself right back on mute and say, no, I'm not ready.
Hey. It's probably one word: COVID.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there something that we can be doing differently? Are we doing everything we can do? Number one priority is keeping everyone safe, but you also have to keep them motivated.
For sure. And what business segment are you in? What do you do?
Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. So.
Okay.
We're both in the same division, so to say, Rappahannock.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Excellent. And I think, how many employees work there?
432 last count.
Nice. Wonderful. I'm going to return to that because I want to gather some ideas, but I think an issue that you might be worried about is, and one that I've done a little bit of background research, of course I've got to pivot right back to something I know, is around mental health and making sure that everybody is feeling safe and engaged. That's something that I hear a lot from human resource roundtables that I participate in. So I'm going to return to that, Anne, but I want to get some other ideas that drew people into this breakout room. And I noticed there's 2 Anns on, so Anne, yes, Anne and M, and then we'll go to Andrea.
Yes, I'll put my microphone up closer so you can actually hear me.
Yes.
But I'm a sole entrepreneur, but my business is Kitchen and Bath Designs, which requires me to, for at least the first visit, I need to go into their house to take measurements and to see the space and discuss with them what their options are and what they want to do with it. And then after that, I can pretty much do everything through Zoom, present the ideas to them, present the final stuff to them through Zoom. But other than that, I really do need to be in the facility to be able to do what I need to do. And so the COVID has really cut down on that. And luckily I don't have any employees that I need to keep going.
Excellent. And I think that, and we can talk about this too, is I think there's an opportunity to think about, there's a challenge there, but it also presents an opportunity to think about, hey, if I can do this virtually, what are the scalability that I didn't even see in front of me previously that COVID potentially presents? Andrea, go ahead.
Yes, so it's more, I guess, a concern we are, because we work in waste and recycling, especially in the construction demolition area, we are heavily impacted by that industry. So this first essentially 9 months, we were able to complete a lot of the jobs that we had were ongoing. But now what we're seeing is new jobs are not starting. And obviously a huge concern because, you know, such a disruption in the flow of business. You know, can we span that gap? Can we keep it going? I have 72 employees, you know, families coming on the holidays, always a huge concern. So, you know, just, I mean, obviously it's a guess, nobody knows, but, you know, huge concern, because there's not a lot I can do to impact that because I am essentially so influenced by that. So just concern there over what the economy is going to be doing and the lack of new projects starting.
Yeah. And so I think don't let me cut off. No one else has come off mute. Is there other thoughts that brought somebody in the group they wanted to share out? Yes, I think, and I'll pause again to make sure I invite other people in. I think, Andrea, you know, how we think about potential opportunities that might be in front of you that may not be, you may not see them right now, if you will, or how do we think about that, or how do we understand how to do that, is something that we can explore a little bit further, but also recognizing that if it's not there, what do you do to preserve cash and sort of hibernate successfully? And so that's something we're also, I have a few slides on, and we can talk about that as well. You know, I feel really honored that two of the businesses that I worked with, and I'm stealing a bit of thunder from some of my slides, but two of the businesses that I worked with, they literally shut down during the first bits of COVID. And we helped them successfully hibernate by preserving as much cash as possible, preserving cash from operations, and then extracting cash from the balance sheet. Three actually businesses that we work with, one nonprofit and two commercial enterprises. All of them are successfully launching post-COVID and are actually growing and are strong. They have more revenue than they had before they shut down. And so, you know, they took different paths even. One of them, you know, did trim some staff and had to make some difficult choices, and they reopened up with a little bit more of a streamlined operation. The other actually used the downtime to reinvest in some of their infrastructure and to clean clean their facilities up a little bit and some processes. And then when they came out, they were able to be stronger during that process. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about some opportunity exploration and some cash preservation, which is kind of important. So I want to return to Ann Lewis's question as well about the physical and mental safety of people. And I'd just be curious if anybody has some insights for Ann about things that they've done that have been really successful. And then I'll sort of offer my own as well. And Curtis, I see you're off mute. Did you want to say something else, or let's answer Ann's question first, and then Curtis, if you had a comment, I'll return to you. Anybody got some tips for Ann Lewis?
For us, we try to, you know, we have a lot of safety meetings, so forth. We're trying to break them into smaller groups. It's a little bit harder on my safety manager, but you know, we're getting by, making sure that people have, you know, it's so hard because, you know, people are used to working together and they'll walk up and just talk to each other and they don't have a mask on or so forth, and we're recycling, so people are touching things that you're not necessarily want to put a mask on your face without washing your hands. So, I mean, it's really awkward. So we've struggled a little bit with that, but try to keep people apart. Thankfully, knock on wood, we've only had one person, and that didn't spread. He got it from home, stayed home, and came first, then came back. So thankfully, we've been able to restrict it. But you know, I think just breaking into small groups and doing things, you know, in shifts and so forth to break up, you know, people congregating. That's been our biggest thing.
And we've used Microsoft Teams quite a bit. We've even set up an employee update area, which is secure on our website. Our CEO has done a lot of what we call telephone town halls and answered questions that employees have had. And normally these meetings are held after hours, and people just, dial in. So I think we're doing well, but it's a struggle. It's been a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And so Andrea kind of hit on it, and you kind of echoed that you're doing some of those things. The buy-in from employees around the type of safety protocols that they feel comfortable is a great starting point to make sure that the safety is built around the input that they're providing. And organizations that I'm working with and that have similar constraints are asking their employees, do you feel safe? What else can we do? And sort of trying to go at length to accommodate those things and above and beyond some of the protocols that are out there. The second, and I kind of went back to mental health because it's a huge challenge right now, and we don't always understand that impact of it. But the Washington Post had a great article, and then I did some other secondary research on it, and the amount of potentially clinical depression and anxiety has almost doubled from about 15% on average to nearing 30-35% on average. Although not all of it can be clinically diagnosed, but the characteristics of it. And interestingly enough, and if there's time, I can pull up this presentation I did on this topic, but just a quick highlights, and my stats may be ever so slightly off. Overwhelming majority of employees said that they just wanted to hear from their manager to ask how you're doing. That's what would really make a difference. And it's so easy to make that happen. And that wasn't happening. And when it was happening, those employees said, I don't actually think my manager cares about my answer, really cares about me. So it's the genuine ask of, hey, how are things going? Tell me. In a genuine way that the employee says, I can answer. We had an HR roundtable, and many of the firms were DC based, but they were spread out. And it was just that simple, For people that are remote, some organizations were saying they're sending things to their house because it's just that trip to the mailbox that is so special now than it wasn't before. Those can really make a difference. So addressing both their physical and both their mental safety is something that I would just encourage. And I'm happy to kind of explore additional stats. Before we run out of time, because that's not fair to some of the other things that you guys came to learn about, I do want to share a couple of slides, and this has been a great dialogue. And Curtis, I hadn't forgotten about you. Shame on me. Go ahead, Curtis. Please share your comment or your question.
Well, I'm with the Fluvanna County EDA, and I'm just looking for some ideas to help out the businesses. So I'm glad to hear everything you've got.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you for that. So let me bring up the slide presentation, and we're going to go completely off script. Okay, so don't worry about, I've got a bunch of slides. That doesn't mean anything, but I do want to hit a couple of topics for us. And so if I flip around, it's because we've already covered some of it and just the organic dialogue that we've had, which has been fantastic. When I'm working with organizations that are going through sort of resiliency, a resiliency roadmap, to me, these three things stick out for this organizations to be successful. One is they have to understand what they really do. What is the core competency that their business model is built around? It is interesting that many people don't fully understand their business model and don't understand the key underpinning assets, intangible or tangible, that drive that organization. So I'll share with you some thoughts there. The second is absolutely knowing your finances. And you don't have to be a financial wizard, but knowing your finances and your data. It's just that important to have data-driven decisions. And then the last is, if you have to pivot, if you have to change, it's not just about changing and trying. I mean, of course, that's a little bit of it, but there actually is a defined methodology, and to try to implement it in a way that's not going to break your organization. So this is my resiliency roadmap. Know your core competencies, and it's sometimes not what you think. Know your data, like chew on it, know it inside and out. and then prepare to pivot and use some methodologies to be successful at that. So, because I think we've got about 15 minutes, I'm going to fly through some slides. Does that sound okay? I'm going to try to bring in some cool stories along the way. So that was a question I asked for you earlier. One of the reasons that I think that resiliency is hard is that when we go through a period of disruption, it's all over the place on the things that are needed. And this actually is we work with organizations that are both hyper growth and literally, especially right now, I've had calls from several investors or angel funders and said, hey, we've got a company in my portfolio and they're going to be done in 2 months. That's it. Like, can you fix them? And so that's, these types of periods of disruption. For us, it is this area of saying, how do we take chaotic change and transform it into strategic change? And it's knowing the financials, knowing the operations, and having the research of your audience insights, all of that kind of swirling together and to do it within a strategic framework that actually works. And I think that's why it's really hard because all of these things have to happen simultaneously if you're going to go through, or as best you can simultaneously, in order to go through that successful change. And this just says why it's important, which we know, and just in the interest of time. So the first thing is about the assets that I mentioned and understanding that which is your core competency, that which you built around, that you're going to change. And so I always remind people that Sprint started from a railroad company. So no matter what you think business you're in, you got to be excited for something totally different. Slack, which is what that symbol is on the right-hand side, it actually came from a failed software company. It was like a tech startup, actually several tech startups, if I'm not mistaken. And it turned out their internal tool that they used to talk to each other was really good. And they were like, crap, well, why don't we just make this the product? So, there has to be a bit of soul searching about what sort of things in your organization are truly competencies that you can start to pivot and build around. And you want to be prepared for whatever direction that may take you. Now, for most organizations, Anne McKinley, I believe it was, you don't have the same physical assets that Ann Lewis had or that Andrea mentioned, because they have physical assets. So there's also intangible assets as well. And to be fair, many organizations are stockpiled full of intangible assets that they're really not cultivating into an advantage. They're just kind of like sitting there and not doing anything with it. And so what we talk about is, how do we investigate the people or the relationships or the experience and reputation that you might have, and in order to develop that into something that is truly a competitive advantage. So the example that I would use here that we're all familiar with is H&R Block. H&R Block started from a busy accountant. He got really busy and decided to put that process down into a checklist and ultimately software as a service. So our understanding of anybody who's in a professional service should be thinking about, how do I take my experience and my knowledge and systematize and process it and put it into ways that can create scalability that I hadn't anticipated. And COVID is going to force us to do that, because many times we can't, as Ann McKinney was kind of talking about, we can't go into those homes anymore. So we got to come up with alternative ways. And when we do that, we automatically start systematizing and putting it into a process. So if you have physical assets, it's what else those physical assets can potentially be used for. So that's the example with the Sprint from a railroad. It turned out that the shortest distance between 2 points was underneath the railroad lines. And so they started putting fiber optic cable between them. So it doesn't always have to be what you think is the actual advantage, but recognizing, what does this mean if I've got this asset, and what else can I do with it? If you've got an asset, it should be used 24/7, a physical asset. If it's not used 24/7, start innovating and thinking up new ideas so that it can be. Data. The way in which one of the first things that we do outside of, we get the financial data from an organization, and then we get their any customer data, and not just surveys, which they may have, but transaction data, usage data, any data about this organization. So, what can you learn from your customers, both from talking to them and gathering that information, but then also the behavioral data, the actual transaction data, or the data that you're collecting on the usage. The easy button, that's all your processes. How can you understand all the steps, all the processes, how much time it takes between them, how many steps there are, what's going on, and then the financials. Everything from the 3 financial statements: balance sheet, income statement, statement of cash flows, as well as any other sort of budget or financial and custom analysis that's being conducted at that organization. So you need to sort of harvest all of this. We worked with a light manufacturing company, and honestly, here in the Charlottesville area. And actually at first it was hard to convince the owner that they needed to get their hands around the data. They had 9 separate repositories of data that didn't really talk well to each other. And we did convince him that this was really, really hindering his ability to make decisions. And he said, okay. And so we pulled all of that data together in order to be able to make better forecasts and project the type of usage for the products that were being produced through his light manufacturing. Literally the weekend that we did our final inventory count to reset all the data and link all his data systems, that's when they did the lockdown for COVID. And if it wasn't for that, he wouldn't have been able to sell in his online store with an accurate inventory count. And he wouldn't have, and all his supply chain wreaked havoc. We wouldn't have had any information to give to them. It was the most fortuitous thing that happened. Literally that weekend, we finally were linking it up. And that's when the shutdown really occurred. And we were still able to make that organization grow in a period when their supply chain was totally disrupted, and they wouldn't have had an online store otherwise. That organization was bought recently, about 2 years ago. He bought it for about $150,000, and he's doing $5 million in sales and didn't miss a beat during the COVID period. So hugely important. I'll skip this one. We talk about like why cash is king, and some of you may know this, but it really is the difference between whether or not you're going to survive or hibernate. It's the difference whether a business is going to retire or thrive. So what we want to be able to do is maximize as much cash as possible and reduce the amount of time that we're burning that cash. And if we are looking at our operations, we'll definitely try to grow revenue, which I've got a slide here about. And then we also try to reduce as many operational costs as possible. That's one way to improve cash flow. The other is that you can extract cash from the balance sheet. And I'm going to talk about the balance sheet in a second. So just a quick slide on revenue diversification. So like we worked with an organization that was in the sort of the restaurant space. And we talked a lot about, okay, if you're starting with a dine-in service, how do you fully diversify? So if you've got a service, how do you make it into a product? And if you've got a B2B business, how do you make it into a B2C business? And then we just started going through all sorts of ideas to hit all of those different quadrants. And that opened up a lot more revenue opportunities than existed before. And then if you think about this bottom one, which says like writing a book, you want to start small and iterate. And, it may start with a post and seeing which of the posts actually get more traction than others. And then as you build a series of posts and then you do blogs, maybe do an article or a white paper, and the book starts to write itself. So it's really important to start small. And I've got a slide on that in a second as well. But the last slide I want to end with on the financial side is related to the balance sheet. This is where it's like this reservoir. This is where you are storing all of your strategic value. And so in good times, we put money into the reservoir, and in lean times, we take money out of the balance sheet. So if you're needing cash, you should be talking with your CFO, or if you are the CFO, you should be looking at your balance sheet to extract cash. So let's end. We got 5 minutes left. Let's end with pivoting, and then we'll end with some questions that you might have as well. I mentioned that pivoting has a methodology, and it's true that it is, and it definitely is about embracing the change that's all in front of us. So this cycle for pivoting is actually in the entrepreneurial circles what we call the effectual cycle, the effectuation. It's just a fancy word for pivoting, but it does have a defined methodology. The first is that you have to have an open mind and know that anything is possible. It's okay to be lucky. It's important to be lucky. Lucky is a mindset. There's actually been research about that. That people who are lucky tend to be more open-minded to potential opportunities. And you try to build around those things that are the competencies of the organization that we first talked about. The second is that you try, but not just try anything, is that you have to understand what's called the affordable loss. For bigger organizations, you can afford to fail and lose more. For small organizations, you might only be able to afford to lose a tweet. And so you have to be able to iterate, you have to be able to try and know that you're going to fail and know that it's okay to fail. And that leads to the third part, which is iterating. So every time you fail, you are learning something, and you're learning about new opportunities, new ways to do something, and you build in a learning mechanism to anything that you're trying to do differently. And then just anything that works, you reinvest in it and build on it. So, and that leads the last to a new defined strategy for the organization. There's a guy in the 80s who kind of grandfathered this thinking. His name is Henry Mintzberg, and he wrote a lot about emergent strategies and being learning organizations and how effective that was. That got picked up, and it led to this effectual cycle, really popular in the entrepreneurial community. And right now, when you're faced with a lot of uncertainty and you don't know what's kind of hitting you and coming in front of you, yeah, we can batten down the hatches financially, but as we think about doing something different, we can go back to this process and really deploy it in order to find new opportunities that we might not have anticipated otherwise. It's my slide on being lucky. And that's it. Let me take this off. We got a couple minutes left. I want to turn back to the group and think about, was there a slide in there that you had a question about? Or let me ask that differently. As we were going through the slides and kind of seeing the 3 different topics and talking about the resiliency roadmap, was there something in there that resonated with you that you wanted to kind of ask further about? And Bridget, I see that you're off mute. I didn't know if you had a question, please.
I don't know if my question pertains to your slides, but I've been freelancing for 23 years. I've had over 100 freelance clients, and I think the thing that I've noticed during COVID is that the contract turnaround and self-promotion has gotten faster because clients aren't lasting very long. Mm-hmm. Some of them have just had bad timing with the startup, or the state has shut them down, or I had one client actually pass away from COVID. Those are things that, you don't plan for. I think my question is, how do I recognize clients who are more stable? And how do I pick the clients to sign contracts with that are going to be the ones that come back with more reliable services? Because the ones I like, obviously, are the ones that are, have ongoing work. And I've got 3 at the moment, and when I'm in a normal year, it would be 6 to 8. Yep. So
I might answer it differently because I'm not sure. I think right now we're going through a period of economic disruption, and there's high flyers and there's people crashing and burning, and I don't know the industries that are that stable. And I might think about how do you create internal stability. So for me, 2020 has been about creating a network of people so we can trade business with each other. That created stability. I've noticed the exact same thing. My projects have gotten smaller and they've gotten shorter duration because of that uncertainty. But I went from carrying about 8 companies that I work with on a regular basis to about 15. And so I would say diversify your clients. I would say diversify what you're offering to create stability. And then I would partner with other people. So I would create stability on your side because I don't know if you're going to find it on your client base.
Is there anything you look for as kind of just a key flag that's kind of a cue for stability from them? Like when you're doing your initial intake, is there anything you look for that would be, oh, well, this is a good client to work with? Is there any red flags that you would say no to?
Well, to be fair, we usually chase chaos, so we're looking for the opposites. But organizations that know their customers tend to do better. Organizations that can pull out a report and tell you about information going on at their organization, they're going to do better. The organizations that are telling you, like, I don't know, like what I always have you done a survey to your customers recently? We've never done one. That might, that to me is a red flag. You've never asked your customers what they think, ever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so there are things like maybe they have a different way of asking it, so I shouldn't be harsh, but those are the things I look for. And most companies can get a sales lift just by doing a survey, because customers sense that you care about their opinion, and they will end up shopping with you or doing business with you more just by asking them, hey, how was your experience with us?
That makes sense.
We used to do research. I lived in Asia where I learned about the tea. We used to do research at a whole country level. And we had to stop our analysis of the data analysis in our country for demand, because as soon as we did research, it automatically changed the revenue profile. Revenue would go up and they'd be like, well, what happened? I'm like, well, we started asking people their opinion. And then they started buying more of whatever we were doing. And we could see it at a whole country level. So, we had to finish our quantitative analysis before we did our other research, because it was that influential to demand.
Yeah, I think that where I get in trouble is I'm the person who sets up their Google ID and their Google business profile and their Yelp profile. I'm the person who sets that up so that we can get the analysis to make decisions.
Yeah, fair enough. No.
I'm fulfilling my own prophecy, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, good. If they haven't pulled us out of breakout rooms, is there another question that's come in?
So David, when you talk about getting money from your balance sheet, you're looking at selling off assets. Is that what you're looking for, or looking at? Or?
You don't always have to sell them off, but yes, maybe it's about leasing during underproductive time. It could be about selling it off. Sometimes there's other assets, and I'm thinking fast. So like your accounts receivable, you can actually take a loan on accounts receivable, things like that. So there's other. I have a whole list of things that can potentially be done on the balance sheet. And so I can pull that up and make sure that you get that whole list. I have a one for operations, and I didn't put it into that PowerPoint. I don't think it's not in my appendix, but I can make sure that I pull that up so you have a complete list. I actually worked with a few bookkeepers and CFOs, and we created a whole comprehensive list. I just didn't, shame on me, I just didn't bring it into this PowerPoint. My gaze has shifted as I'm already searching through my files so that I can bring that up for you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I've got it right here if he hasn't closed it out. I thought I did. Good. So while I'm looking for that, other questions? Like this one's even called maximizing cash during uncertainty. This one is the balance sheet slide. Why isn't that bringing it up? Hold on. Do you guys see that? Should take 3 places to look. Accounts receivable and payables, inventory, and physical assets. So sell off, take a loan, refinance. Also don't buy assets. You could lease. It's a little bit more expensive in the short term, and then 24/7 productivity of assets. There's so many success stories of people who just did something else with their assets when they were unproductive and found out that was a better business. There's like pizza companies who decided to, when the restaurant wasn't open, to make dough, and then found out they had national sellability of their entire pizza. And they're like, oh, we were just trying to use our oven when it wasn't, when it wasn't being used. So yeah, that's a really creative way to think about. And I have another slide just like this on operations. What's the best way to let you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just put my email in the chat here, and you guys could copy it, send me an email.
It's all being recorded, so.
Oh, right. Yeah, Deaton Group LLC @gmail.com.